Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see almost full room full of people on Halloween Day. And the first thing I'd like to do is wish you happy Halloween, because this is Halloween. Halloween Day. We have a lot of treats that we plan to give you today in the form of great information. The tricks you're going to have to wait for this evening for at the mixer, which I'm sure will be a rousing party. But we do have some great information for you today. This is Pro Day, as Mike mentioned, and I'll be talking about where Pro came from, where we intend to go, and how we plan to be an asset to the industry. We don't want to do any finger waving or scolding. We want to be here to help all of you. So with that, let me discuss the presentation outline. I'll be talking about what Pro is and why we formed Pro. I'll give you the Pro vision. I'll talk about the Pro mission and some of our activities, which Phil DeKemper will elaborate in much more detail on. And then we'll talk about how Pro will improve the concrete industry. So let's step back and set the stage first with why we're forming Pro, why we formed Pro, because Pro now is alive and well and underway. So this is an article that was published in Construction Dive. And for those of you in the world of construction, you might read this. It's a daily news feed that is read by construction people primarily, but there are some structural engineers like myself who keep current with it as well. And this was a headline story just a couple of weeks back, 2.5 weeks ago. Construction lost as much as $40 billion on poor productivity in 2022. $40 billion. And about half of the contractors see labor inefficiencies worsening. So that's just a recent story. Let's step back a little farther. Let's look at the New York Times. The New York Times, back in February of this year, published a headline story in their Sunday edition. The story, Construction Tells About America's Economy, is Disturbing. This was a multi-page story, a feature story in their Sunday paper. And the very first thing it says, here's something odd. We're getting worse at construction. And then it goes on to say in the next paragraph that throughout the 1950s and 60s, construction productivity was actually outpacing the general economy. But then in the 70s and 80s, something happened. Something happened, and they couldn't identify what that something might have been. They had a lot of different theories. But the gist of the story was that for some reason, construction productivity in the 1970s and 80s began to flatten out and then went on a long glide slope down to the point that productivity, which is measured in value creation per unit of time, that's the standard economic definition of production, or productivity, the value creation per unit of time is about where it was in World War II. And I want to make clear that when I talk about construction today, in fact throughout the day, in my presentation, Phil's and all the presenters that you'll be hearing today, construction means all of us. I'm a structural engineer. So when we talk about construction has problems, what we're really talking about is all of us have some trouble. Designers, material suppliers, fabricators, subcontractors, general contractors, we have to work together to improve construction productivity. Let's step back even further. Let's go back 6 years. McKinsey Global went to 41 countries around the world. They did a deep dive into our world of construction. They talked with architects, engineers, material suppliers, fabricators, contractors, compiled a lot of data, and issued this 6 years back, this report on construction productivity. Now, if you've read it or if you've heard about it and discussed it, I know that there are some controversies associated with what they concluded. There are some controversial statements and some controversial conclusions they arrived at. But the overall thread is that construction productivity is not keeping pace with productivity improvements in the rest of industry. And if we look at this next slide, this illustrates it very clearly. I'm going to grab this light pointer and walk you through, because this is a very important slide to think about. If you look at the left, this comes from the National Bureau of Economic Research. The blue line is GDP, so basically CPI. The gray line is construction materials. That's called the Construction Intermediate Price Index, so that's the gray line. And the orange line is Construction Price Index, which represents the price of completed construction projects. So you look at back in the 50s into the 60s, they're all tracking pretty much coincident. And then in the 70s, even though materials, construction materials, were tracking with the CPI, the price of completed projects began to spike up. And we're still on this upward trajectory. So prices have been going up steadily all the way to 2019. Now you come over here to McKinsey. This is a document, or a graph rather, they produced prior to their report in 2017. But you look here at McKinsey, the same trend. Now this is productivity. So productivity here and prices there. This is price, this is productivity. Here's construction. We're outpacing the general economic trends until the 70s. And then we flatten out, and now we're on a glide slope down. And we end in 2010 where we started after World War II. After World War II. So what this shows is that at the same time that productivity began to dip, prices began to spike. It's called Economics 101. If productivity drops, prices go up. If productivity improves, prices flatten out or go down. So this is very revealing because it basically it's two ways of looking at the same problem. When productivity begins to decline, prices spike up. So if you've remodeled your kitchen or your bathroom and you thought you paid twice, it's because you did. You paid twice as much as you should have. If you buy a new house and you think, wow, that's an expensive house, why does it cost so much? Well, we're just not doing a good enough job in our industry. And that's the collective we. That's me as a designer. That's all of us in this room, including academics who are doing research and people writing building codes. We need to think about the problem, define some solutions, and move forward, which is where Pro comes in. So let's dig just a little deeper into McKinsey before we go on. This is the way McKinsey described the problem. And I won't read through all of this, but I think the orange, what I've highlighted in orange, is very revealing. Even while other sectors from retail to manufacturing have transformed their efficiency, boosted their productivity, and embraced the digital age, construction appears to be stuck in a time warp. Now, that's a pretty controversial statement. And there would be people who take offense at that, and plenty of people have. Because construction has made some real strides forward. In design, if I look at what we do in my office now, I'm based in Seattle, and we also have a Chicago office, but if I look at what we do in my office today versus 35 years ago, it's like going from the Stone Age to outer space. I mean, we're doing things now with Revit and BIM. We can iterate through multiple different options in designing a building. The production of our drawings is much quicker. The analysis process is much faster. So we're clearly way ahead of where we were 30 or 35 years ago. Same thing is true out in the field. The equipment, the technology, the systems people are using are far more advanced today than they were 35 or 40 years ago. Nevertheless, we have a lot of friction points. There are a lot of friction points between what I do as a designer. We hand off the drawings to the rebar fabricator, and they produce shop drawings. There's a lot of friction there and a lot of lack of communication, frankly. And we have so many friction points that we've, I think, created between what I do with design and what finally gets built, that somehow, even though we have a lot of improvement, the net effect is we've gone nowhere. So that's an important thing to internalize before we talk pro. So McKinsey concluded with some recommendations, and you can see all these on the screen. I won't read through them. Our initial focus with pro is on the first one, because we believe that if we start by improving the constructability of design, we automatically improve productivity in the field. So if designers become more aware of contemporary construction systems, for example, if designers learn more about forming and they understand the high production potential of some of these modern forming systems, and truly modern forming systems are not what they were 30 or 40 years ago, where you'd go to the lumber yard, buy some lumber, and build the form at the job site. And we have these phenomenal forming systems, but if the designer knows nothing about them, and if the designer changes column size every time the load changes, or if the designer changes the beam depth every time the beam span changes, you can basically sabotage what could have been a much more productive job site. So that's one example of many. But if we can improve the knowledge that designers carry in their heads when they sit down to make design decisions, knowledge about formwork, the importance of minimizing rebar congestion and how to go about it when you're designing a building, the proper way to specify materials. So when you're creating concrete specifications, you need to be aware of modern techniques for batching concrete and what suppliers prefer and what they don't prefer. If designers have better knowledge and a higher knowledge base to work from, we believe productivity automatically improves. So we're focusing first on the constructability of design. Phil DeKemper, when he talks about Pro in detail, will dive into a lot of other activities that we are getting involved in. So to make change, I want to shift topics now and talk about where we need to go from here. To change anything, whether it's our industry, to change anything you do when you get back home, we need to buck tradition. We need to recognize that the way we do things today might be for no other reason than because we did it that way yesterday. And the way we did it yesterday is for no other reason than because we did it that way the day before. So we need to buck tradition. And here's a good example of why we need to buck tradition. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. Doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. Now you can run with the bulls in Spain if you want, and it might be kind of fun actually, if you know what you're doing. But it might be incredibly stupid, and I think it probably was for this guy. I have no idea how that ended up, but I think he had a pretty good headache when he came down. I hope he hit the bull first, actually, because if he didn't, he had a real headache. So we need to recognize that tradition is wonderful, and there are a lot of reasons for preserving good traditions. But I believe we have some traditions in our industry that we need to rethink. We need to take the blinders off. We need to blue sky the future. We need to ask, why not? Why not? Why can't we improve the way we go about our business? Why can't we improve the collaboration between designers and contractors? If designers and contractors simply talk more frequently, magic happens. Great things happen. So why can't we change that? We can. We can. But we need to buck tradition. So let's now talk about Pro. What is Pro? Pro is ACI's third and newest center of excellence. Pro is separate from ACI, but under the ACI umbrella. So if you think of ACI as one great big umbrella organization, we have 3 centers of excellence now underneath it. We have Next, we have New, and now we have Pro. And we feed off of each other. So Pro is separate and distinct, but symbiotic. So it's a beautiful relationship. Pro is narrowly focused. It can move quickly because it is separate from ACI, but it benefits from all of ACI's vast network and resources. And I am not here to bash ACI at all. I'm going to talk about some of the differences between the centers and ACI. The challenge with ACI is it is so big and involved in so many activities simultaneously that it's hard to move quickly in any one of them. It's hard to move quickly in any one of them because it's involved everywhere, and that's a great thing. ACI has been extremely successful, but it's hard to make rapid progress in any one area because of that scattered focus. So that's the beauty of the centers. So a little more detail on Pro. We are a separate entity, as I mentioned. We're a nonprofit 501c3 subsidiary. We have our own bylaws and board of direction. I chair the board. Phil DeKemper is our executive director. We're focused on a specific industry target, which is improving productivity. And because we're narrowly focused, we can make faster progress. Now, the other reason for faster progress is we are not encumbered by ACI bylaws. So we don't need to follow the consensus-based development of documents that ACI of necessity follows. So the consensus-based process is fundamental to ACI and extremely important what ACI does. We do not need to follow that as pro, and because of that, we're fast and we're focused. We're focused on a narrow target, and we can move quickly. Same thing is true with Next and You. Our members will primarily be corporations and nonprofits who will provide our money, our financial support. I would welcome all of you to consider becoming members or your parent companies. We are steadily gaining membership and financial support, but our first focus area actually is to make sure we have enough money in the kitty to continue operating, which we will. We're getting tremendous positive response from the industry. And as I say, we're steadily gaining corporate sponsors and membership. Phil DeKemper will talk in more detail about that. And finally, the last bullet, we essentially purchase IT, accounting, marketing, and other services from ACI. So if we need some help with marketing, we get on the hall to the marketing people, and we buy some service from ACI. If we need help with IT, we buy some IT time from ACI. Beautiful relationship. The same is true with Next and You. So separate 501c3 entities, but they benefit from the big ACI umbrella. Let's talk about the Pro Vision. Our vision is a center that promotes the productivity potential. Start over again there. We envision a concrete industry where the productivity potential of contemporary materials and construction systems is fully realized and continually advanced. So what does that mean? Well, that means that our vision is, in a perfect world, if we look at all of the wonderful materials we have available today, concrete materials, we look at all of the construction systems available today, if we can marry those up in the most ingenious fashion possible, and if we can collaborate and work together and share information, we realize the full potential of the materials and systems. So our vision is reduce the friction points. You know, if you look at an organization like Uber, the Uber idea was very, very simple but very powerful. They just eliminated a few friction points in the process of getting a car. The friction point on a taxi is you have to first find one and then get in, and when you get out, you spend 5 minutes trying to get your credit card to work and all of that. Uber, that's all done in advance, and it's on an app. That's really all it was. So Uber eliminated friction points. And if we eliminate friction points in our industry, we begin to realize the potential of all of our great materials and systems. So that's our vision, our mission. If we drop down a little closer to earth, what are we actually going to be doing day to day? We're going to collaborate with designers, suppliers, builders, and other stakeholders to improve the constructability of design and the productivity of construction. And we're starting with improving the constructability of design. We've already rolled out a training program. If you're not familiar with it, please take a look. You can find it on the ACI website. We have 12 recorded modules, and you watch each one. It's about an hour. You take a test. If you pass the test, you go on to the next one. If you pass all 12, you get a certificate. And the certificate says you've been trained by ACI in constructability. We're targeting it primarily to structural engineers. So the goal is that as this certificate program gains wider use and visibility, and my understanding from Mike Tholen is that it has been one of the most successful, if not the most successful and popular training program that ACI has ever rolled out. I believe that's still true. Yeah, so the most popular training program ACI has ever rolled out is our constructability training program. So that says a lot. That says there was a market need. That says there was a market need. So it's 12 parts. If you pass all 12, you get a nice certificate. And then our next goal is to make sure that owners and developers and other people in the industry are aware of this so they start asking for it. It'd be wonderful if a developer or a client of mine would call and say, you know what, I heard about this constructability training program. Are your people trained in it? That's the day we want to achieve. We want to get to the point that owners are aware of the need for this training and they start asking design consultants about it, because you can bet your bottom dollar if owners start asking for it, every design office in the country will have their people trained in it. Otherwise, you don't get a lot of work. So it's the way business works. Our activities, pro activities, I'll talk just briefly about this because Phil will talk in great detail about what we're doing. I've already talked about the constructability. Drop all the way to the bottom bullet. interaction with ACI committees. As a corollary to Pro, something we've also done, and this is not part of Pro, but it's essentially symbiotic with Pro. We rolled out, during my presidential term, one of the things I was proudest of accomplishing, this was one, getting Pro off and running. The other was setting up a constructability review committee for ACI 318 changes. So we have a committee that I believe met for the first time just yesterday. Is Oscar here by any chance? Oscar's not here. I believe they met yesterday for the first time. We have a committee of people, and they are hand-chosen from the industry. They're people who understand design and construction. And their role is to review the proposed changes coming out of ACI 318 subcommittees. So as subcommittees are developing proposed changes, they go off to the main committee. They also go to the Constructability Review Committee. And the purpose of that committee is to evaluate the impact to the industry that that change would create. So they give a report back to 318 and they say, if you go forward with this, here's the impact to the industry. Now 318 still has control, so they maintain control over their own document. They have to have that. They can do what they want with the advice that the committee gives them, but at least they go in with their head up. And if the committee says, if you do this, you're going to throw a big monkey wrench into this industry. So if you have to make the change, make it. But just be aware it's going to be really painful. That's the objective of that committee. I mean, I can look back over my own. I served on 318 for 21 years. Wonderful group of people, well-intentioned. The best and brightest minds are typically involved in 318. But nevertheless, in many cases, they operate without any input from industry. So they make their best guess as to what the impact might be when they change the code, and they oftentimes really don't know. They really don't know. And then what happens is you make the change, you issue the new code, 6 months later you start realizing what you've done, and then you wait for the next code cycle to fix it. That's 6 more years. So, you know, once it's inked, once the changes are finalized and inked and the ink dries and it gets issued, it takes a long time to fix some of this stuff. Let me show you one example of that. Let me show you one example of that. Let's see, how do I activate this little video? See if I can activate. I think if I just click on it. Oh, there we go. Okay, watch this. So this is a diagonal bar and a link beam. This is required by code in high seismic regions. These guys, a crew of 4 guys, are placing one diagonal bar. So this guy's down here. It gets in the way, so he cuts that cross tie out. This guy up here is trying to feed it through. Now he has to pry those bars apart. So you get that bar. That's one bar. You got a guy up here pushing. He's pushing. He's prying. You're still jammed up. There's a 4th guy down here you don't see. You'll see him in a moment. This is one bar and one link beam. Oh, here he is down here. You got 2 guys doing nothing over here. But they're supervising. Now this is funny. Get the hammer out. Beat the hell out of it. There you go. Finding it. So that's one bar. Pardon my French, by the way. But that's one bar. Now, these bars, from a performance standpoint, these are diagonal bars and a link beam. And this is a core that might, I don't know what the extent of that core was. It's in California, I believe, or Hawaii, probably California. But you might have, on the average core, 6 or 8 link beams like this. And if they all require diagonal bars, typically you'll have maybe 12 to 16 each direction. So you might have a total of 25 to 30 total bars that have to be placed in 6 different locations around that core. It's not easy. Now there are ways to prefab this. This is an example of how not to do it actually. But the bottom line is this is a very good engineering solution. The performance is very good. It's a very poor constructability solution. So from the standpoint of engineering performance, it's great. It's great. From the standpoint of constructability, not so great. And that's an example of what we want to catch before it gets inked and into the code with our new Constructability Review Committee. so that ACI 318 would have some feedback. If you go forward with this, this is going to be huge impact to contractors. They need to know this before they finalize their voting. And they were very receptive. When we rolled this out, I called Andy Taylor, who happens to be in Seattle. I know him well. Called Andy, had a great conversation. He's not here, I don't believe, but had a great conversation with Andy, told him what I wanted to do. He said, man, we need that. That's great. He said, we need that information. That would be so helpful. And he said he had actually thought about trying to populate the committee with a few additional people who were essentially construction field people, but the committee was already big enough. So to have the outside input from people who understand the industry impact, he was totally on board and welcomed it. Oops. Now I want to show you a good example. I want to conclude with this. Just food for thought, food for thought. Everybody knows the Empire State Building, downtown Manhattan, built almost 100 years ago. So they began excavation in January of 1930. They opened the building May 1st of 1931. Now if you do the math, that's less than 16 months from the day they started excavation until they opened the building. Less than 16 months. Now, they didn't worry near as much about safety back in those days. So that's a good thing. We go a little slower now because we have much better job site safety. That's great. Apparently they double shifted. They had the advantage of a lot of out-of-work people because it was right in the middle of the Great Depression. So they had a lot of advantages on their side. But nevertheless, it was 100 years ago, almost. And they built that building and opened it up in 16 months. My guess would be if you tried to build a clone of that down the street, you could take that one and turn that into a 3. That'd be 36 months. Anybody dispute that? Maybe 48 months. I don't know. Be a long time. We know it wouldn't be 16. You wouldn't turn the first shovel of dirt and open that building up 16 months later today. So now that may not be the very best example, but it's certainly one example. It's one example of what we need to do with our industry. We need to rethink where we've come from, rethink the way we collaborate. Our lunch today is going to be all about that. We have Dan Baker speaking. We have Jeff Coleman speaking. Please attend if you haven't registered. You still can. But we have a great lunch with 2 phenomenal speakers. And the discussion is going to be, why don't we talk more as an industry? Why don't we collaborate better as an industry? What is it about our industry that somehow builds walls? Why are we all in silos? Why, as a designer, do I not pick up the phone and call a rebar placer when I'm laying out rebar, which I often do, actually. But why don't more people do that? Why don't we go out to job sites and walk a job site as a designer and ask the guy who is installing the rebar, where are the pinch points? Where are the pinch points? I think I'm getting the hook. But, if we can create more collaboration, we create a better industry. So that's the message. And with that, I thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. And I hope this will be valuable today as you learn more about Pro and where Pro is headed.